Thank you, Lynn. Yes, I'm going to give my customary regulatory update now. I'm going to start with an apology. I'm suffering. I have man flu. So I might need to go and have a glass of water, or if I have a coughing fit, I do apologize. So we're focusing today on two areas: AI this morning, and then shortages, which is an issue that is frankly a global issue. Well, both of these are global issues. And so I'm going to try and give you a brief overview of the current regulatory position, because it is changing. It's an area that's fast moving for both of these areas. So I'm going to focus primarily on the EU and the USA. I will mention obviously any differences between EU and UK. Um, we're still part of Europe. I should put Europe rather than EU, shouldn't I? So I'm going to start with artificial intelligence, and then I'll move on to shortages. Um, there's little doubt that AI, machine learning, that whole technology has huge potential. It's just mind-boggling how much we could use this. But there are concerns, and obviously regulators have a job to make sure that those concerns are not realized, and we do it in a controlled manner. And I quote here Professor Geoffrey Hinton, who won the Nobel Prize for his work to develop AI just this year. And he said, I'm really pleased to receive the Nobel Prize, but I worry that the overall consequences of this might be that systems are more intelligent than us and might eventually take control. So you're in the Terminator um, scenario. But it is essential then that there is a proper, robust regulatory framework for this. Now, the EU has taken the lead. I don't believe anywhere else in the world has actually enacted legislation yet on AI, except for the EU. And we got the new EU regulation 2024-1689 that became official, was published officially in July this year. It's got a rather complicated implementation. It does away with a whole load of other existing legislation. So it is a consolidation. And as I say, it does have a rather complicated phase-in process. Most of it will become effective in August 26. Some of the provisions become effective from February next year. Some of them are from August next year, and some of them from 2027. So if you're in this field, you're going to need to try and keep up to date with which bits apply and when. So that's not unusual with European legislation, I would say. And obviously, that's the law. It's very high level stuff. What It's not really practicable on a day-to-day basis. So we're starting to see now some thoughts coming out. We don't yet have really any official guidance. We have published the EMA has and HDMA, the Health and Medicines Agency, have published AI use in large language modules. That's things like Chat GPT, if you're going to use them in regulatory submission. So they've published some guiding principles, but again, pretty high level. And they've actually produced a rather cute infographic that you can use with the four main principles: ensure safe input of data, apply critical thinking, and cross-check outputs. Yes, isn't it? It's the old adage, garbage in, garbage out. Whatever you train your large language model with is what it's going to spout back at you. So if you don't train it with the right stuff, and you can make mistakes here, obviously by commission, by training it with the wrong things, or by omission and missing something out. And keep up to date. The world keeps moving, and you've got to keep your large language module up to date, and who to consult and report issues to when it goes wrong. We've had an EMA reflection paper. The draft came out in July last year. They got over 1,300 comments, and we got the final version published just at the end of September. But again, it's only a reflection paper. It is not yet guidance, but it has been adopted both for human and veterinary medicines. And it says, AI is often developed through machine learning, where models are trained from data, and it provides considerations on the use of those models in the life cycle of a medicinal product. including right from product development all the way through to marketing authorization and post-marketing authorization submissions. And one of the things they're emphasizing is you need to have a human-centric approach. Whatever you do is got to be understandable by humans. You can't have it running off and doing something that the human being can't actually understand. I think next year we will see some first guidance from the EU, in draft at least. They've been talking about revising Annex 11, which I'm sure all of you QPs will know is the one that deals with computer systems. They published a concept paper back in January last year, so almost 2 years ago now. They did say that they hope to have it finished and published as a draft by the end of this year. But any of you who have ever followed any of these reflection papers will know they're always wildly optimistic in their timelines. Um, and so I do think we will get something on Annex 11 and a consequential change to Chapter 4 on documentation. So that's going to be interesting. The two main drivers for updating Annex 11 are data integrity concerns, which have been around for a long time, and obviously AI and machine learning. I'm sure that they were working on this, but they've undoubtedly been waiting for the completion of the new regulation, which was completed in July. So at least they'll know what the law says. So I'm hoping that we will see something published as a draft sometime next year. Earlier, later, your guess is as good as mine. But as I say, it's mainly going to be about, they had 33 possible additional changes that they listed in the concept paper, but the bulk of those were either to do with data integrity or AI. Lynn's already mentioned the US FDA are also obviously looking at this. They've been published, not Europe has reflection papers, America has discussion papers. I think it's the same thing, just by another name. And they had a discussion paper on AI in drug manufacturing issued in March last year. So about the time the draft of the EU reflection paper came out. And they were highlighting potential areas where AI might well be used: process design and scale up, advanced process control. We were looking at that when I left Lilly 20 years ago, trying to have data capture from all of the instruments and stuff. So that's obviously, and trend monitoring, which has always been something I've banged on about for years. you know, our industry is data rich but information poor because we do not use our data well enough, and simple techniques like control charts to actually trend the data. So there's some obviously low hanging fruit there, and I would definitely agree with the FDA there. And then we had another discussion paper from the FDA in May, just a few months later, on using AI and machine learning in the development of drugs and biological products. And that had three main areas of focus: human-led governance and accountability, quality, reliability, and representativeness of data, and model development, performance monitoring, and validation. And so in March this year, we had artificial intelligence and medical products, how CBER, CEDA, CDRH, and OCP are working together. Any of you who follow work at FDA, that's actually quite unusual, isn't it? For all of the branches of FDA to come together, but it makes sense. You don't want to have a siloed approach to this. It's going to be used across the board, in, drugs, biologics, and medical devices. So the FDA, and I read this paper, one of the things, again, they were very concerned about was what they call AI bias. Because it all depends on what you're using to train your artificial intelligence systems. You can use too little or you can use incorrect data. So AI is very much a developing area for the regulators. I think it's going to be up to industry to lead this. The regulators are not going to be the technical experts. They will have experts, but it's up to industry to work with the regulators we decide how we want to use it. We need to provide examples to the regulators, and hopefully we can get some sensible controls that we're happy with and the regulators are happy with. Because at the end of the day, we all have the same objective of wanting to protect patients. So It's happening. You know, the genie is out of the bottle. AI is happening. And it's all up to all of us to decide how best to manage it and control it and use it in a way that is positive without and avoid some of the potential pitfalls with it. As with any new technology, there are always pitfalls as well. So that's the regulatory position with AI. It is very much in its infancy. There is not a huge amount. Let's say you've got the EU's regulation, but that's a very high level regulation at the moment. It's when we get down into the detail of guidance that we're going to actually see more. An area that where is the regulatory requirements are more developed, particularly in the USA, is on drug shortages. And I'm going to start with the USA here. Shortages of medicines are a global issue. There's all sorts of issues. Ladies of a certain age in Europe would probably know, uh, worried about the HRT shortage that was a few years ago. I remember the EpiPen shortages. For anybody, my eldest daughter's partner's got severe nut allergy and has to carry an EpiPen. So these things really do impact patients, and so this is an area of direct patient impact. So regulators around the world now are implementing measures, first of all, to gather the data to find out where are the problems, require marketing authorization holders to report problems promptly, because obviously sometimes it's only the regulators got the big view of what actually is the supply chain issues. Um, Understand the causes of shortages. There's been a lot of work done on that over the last 10 years, and obviously trying to mitigate the impact of those shortages on patients. So I'm going to start with the US because the US actually started work on this over 10 years ago. And I think it was all Lynn's fault, wasn't it? It was the Benvenue consent decree. Benvenue was for those of you that don't remember, was a contract manufacturer of sterile products in the US. And they got themselves into trouble with the FDA. They had warning letters in 2007 and 2011. And they had a consent decree in 2013, which ultimately led to the closure of the site. Now, they were making sterile injectable products for a number of companies, and a lot of those were important medicines. They were cancer treatments, etc., etc. So the fact that they suddenly went out of business left a lot of problems with shortages, not just in the US, but globally. So that kick-started, if you like, the US to take some action. And one of the things that they decided was that the FDA should report an annual shortage report to to Congress, and it's done for the calendar year. So I'm going to quote and show you some figures from the calendar year last year, 2023. And what you can see there is that if you look at 2010, 2011, which is around about the sort of Benvenue time, 2012, quite a high number of shortages from the back. The highest peak there is just touching 250 shortages reported. And what you can see is the number then falling away quite significantly. One thing I noticed is last year you're seeing an increase. The smaller red bar is actually the biologics. The blue bar is the drugs, things that are handled by CBER rather than CDER. And the CBER ones are actually creeping up, which is interesting. And the FDA claim that they have managed to head off a number of shortages. And you can see these are the number of shortages that the FDA say they have prevented in each year. And again, you can see actually the highest number they prevented was in 2021. So what did the FDA do, or what was done by the politicians really, to mitigate the shortages? There was a 2011 executive order that basically told the FDA to reduce the shortages. And that's when the annual reporting was introduced. We had the 2012 FDASIA Act, which required manufacturers of most critical drugs to notify FDA of a permanent discontinuation or interruption. The CARES Act, as it was called, again extended that, enhanced the FDA's visibility, and the 2022 Fedora, again, included better provisions to get the FDA to work more closely together. One of the things that FDA issued draft guidance on in 2022 was the idea that companies ought to plan for shortages. In other words, have prevention plans and have mitigation plans. Um, Look at your supply chain, understand your vulnerabilities, put in maybe some redundancy if you have a particular exposure, particularly where the medicine is critical and maybe you are the only supplier. So this is likely to apply certainly to many branded companies, but also to generics as well, because most of the products that Benvenue were producing were generic; they weren't branded. Now, the EU, not surprisingly, has also proposed new human medicines regulations, and measures to address the supply chain issue are in those drafts. Now, they were issued in April last year. Your guess is as good as mine was when they'll be finalised. There is, I suppose, an outside chance they might be finalised next year, but don't hold your breath. And even then, there's likely to be at least a 2 or 3 year implementation period for most of the measures. But what the EU has already implemented a new regulation. In 2022, those of you going for Vivas, this is a nice number, 2022 123, relatively easy number to remember. Um, but that gave a new role to the European Medicines Agency to monitor medicines supply and healthcare crisis preparation. And the EMA was to set up a European shortages monitoring platform to gather and supply and demand data. And that's just about to come up. They also required the setting up of a new committee to draw up a list of critical medicines across the EU, and that has happened. So this European medicines monitoring platform is now up and running. It was launched, or they said it was launched in June, and they issued details on about how to use it in July this year, and it's supposed to be operational from February next year. So that is actually going to meet the 3 year deadline that was in that directive. And this will enable the EMA to monitor the supply and demand and availability of the critical medicines that have already been identified. What's going to change, I think, with the broader human medicines legislation changes, it will extend some of these things to all medicines. Now, I guess it's going to be dependent on the criticality. Probably if you're making paracetamol or ibuprofen tablets, there's plenty of other manufacturers out there. But even generic manufacturers, as we saw with Benvenue, can have a huge impact on patients. So, as of February next year, all EU marketing authorization holders of these critical medicines will be obliged to use the platform to report data on supply and availability of the critical medicines. So, what are the critical medicines? This list was first published just under 12 months ago, 11 months ago now, um, jointly by the Commission, Heads of Medicines Agency, and the EMA. The list contains 300 products that contain 200 different active substances. And it covers a wide range of therapeutic areas, including vaccines and medicines for rare diseases. When they published it, they said the list will be updated every year. I have not yet seen an update to it this year, so we'll have to wait and see. One of the other things the EU has done under HERA, which is and if I can remember this, the Emergency Response and Preparedness, the Health Emergency Response and Preparedness Authority. And they have set up what they're calling a Critical Medicines Alliance. And this alliance is made up of representatives from national authorities, from industry, civil society, the European Commission, and the EU agencies like EMA. And the aim is to be a forum, basically a discussion forum, because regulators can't solve this issue alone. They do need the participation of industry to understand and manage this. So it consists of a forum, a steering committee, and working groups. And they held their first meeting in April this year. I don't know whether any of you recognize any of those participants. The only one I recognize is Emma Cook on the end there from the EMA. And in June this year, what they said was they're going to take 11 of the active substances out of the list of 200 and do a sort of deep dive into what's causing the shortage, where are the vulnerabilities. And so they um, ask for all the information, and they also, one of the things that came out of that was 2 templates to report. Again, the critical medicine suppliers had to produce, are asked to be producing now, shortage prevention plans and shortage mitigation plans. They're not having to submit them unless they've got a shortage, but they did say that they would be inspectable during inspections, the prevention plans at least. So again, going to depend on risk. If you've got one of those critical medicines, you're going to have one of these prevention plans. Um, and so we'll have to wait and see. Now, one of the things is, we're in the UK, so I can't ignore the MHRA. And just last week, the MHRA had a very useful webinar on what industry can do to prevent shortages. Um, and basically, know your medicines and know your patient population. So you need to understand the criticality of your medicine. Um, what is the clinical use, um, contractors and the current GXP and other compliance status and supply chain vulnerabilities. This is because I asked the question, are you planning on asking UK manufacturers to have shortage prevention plans and shortage mitigation plans? And Bernadette's response was, no, not yet. We're going to watch what happens in the EU. We're going to watch to see how effective those plans are, and we will see whether we want to introduce similar measures into the UK. So one of the things they said is keep your dossiers up to date, optimize processes and aim for early detection and communication of issues. And communication is one of the key things here in heading off issues, because you may not, if certainly for generics, you may not be the only supplier. I mean, HRT, EpiPens, they're not branded products anymore. They've been generic for years, and yet we've had shortages of them. Monitor wider geopolitical issues and have contingency plans. So it doesn't actually say you need a shortage prevention plan, and it doesn't actually say you should need a shortage mitigation plan, but for God's sake, think about these things. So many regulatory authorities are now thinking about these two things that we've got the subject today, about the control of AI and machine learning, and trying to reduce the occurrence of shortages and to better management if and when they do occur. So it's beholden on us as industry and to work with the regulators on both of these issues. So interesting, it's interesting times, as always. Okay.